I am my mother's lawyer." Those powerful words echoed across the courtroom like a thunderclap. Judge Harrison stopped, flipping through his papers, and looked up in surprise. 9-year-old David Thompson stood tall and confident next to his mother, Janet. His voice was clear and strong, cutting through the silence like a knife. Janet looked down at her son, her eyes filled with pride and fear at the same time. Across the room, David's rich biological father, Robert Wellington III, almost spilled his coffee. "I'm sorry, young man," the judge said politely, "but this is a legal matter for adults." "I know, Your Honor," David replied calmly, "but according to Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the US supports, I have the right to share my opinion in matters that affect me." He pushed up his glasses and opened a school notebook filled with notes. "And this case affects me more than anyone else." Everyone in the courtroom was stunned. Robert, a powerful real estate businessman in Chicago, glared at his two expensive lawyers, clearly angry they hadn't seen this coming. Janet, who worked long hours as a nurse to raise David on her own, had been doing everything she could to provide for him. Meanwhile, Robert had barely shown up in David's life only 4 times in 8 years. Each time, he came with gifts and empty promises. Now suddenly, he wanted full custody. Robert's lawyer, Dr. Mitchell, stood up and said, "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The child has no legal authority." David calmly interrupted, "If you really care about me, you'd want to listen to what I have to say, instead of trying to shut me up." Robert leaned in to whisper something to his lawyer, but David kept speaking. He held up his notebook confidently. "Your Honor, I've prepared a presentation on why I should stay with my mom. I also have proof of my father's real reasons for wanting custody." He looked directly at Robert. "Reasons I think the court will find very interesting." Robert's face turned pale. What had this child found out? How did a 9-year-old prepare better than millionaire lawyers? Everyone in that room was witnessing something rare, a brave, smart kid who had uncovered secrets powerful enough to expose the lies of a rich man. If this moment touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what David reveals next could change not just his life, but how courts listen to children forever. Dr. Mitchell tried to stay calm and professional. "Your Honor, while we admire the boy's confidence, this court deals with serious legal matters that need proper representation." David snapped his notebook shut. "Then why didn't anyone provide a lawyer for me?" The room went quiet again. "In the last 8 months, no one thought to ask what I wanted, even though it's my future being decided." Robert shifted uncomfortably. David's calmness and courage were clearly getting to him. Janet looked at her son nervously. She had noticed he had been reading law books from the library after school. She thought it was just curiosity. She had no idea he was preparing for this moment. Dr. Mitchell spoke again. "Mr. Wellington just wants the best for his son. Ms. Thompson means well, but she can't give David the same opportunities that his father can." David opened his notebook again. "Opportunities? Let's talk about that." He flipped to a page. "Your Honor, may I share some facts about my father's concern?" Judge Harrison had seen many custody battles, but never anything like this. On one side, there were rules to follow. On the other, there was a child who spoke better than most adults. "David," Janet whispered, worried, "maybe we should let the lawyers talk." "What lawyers, Mum?" David replied gently, "We can't afford any, so either I speak or no one does." Robert finally spoke. "David, son, I know this is confusing." "Don't call me son." David's tone was icy. It made the room freeze. "In 9 years, you showed up 4 times. Twice on my birthday, always late. Once at Christmas for 20 minutes. And once when you needed a photo with a child for a news story." Robert looked like he wanted to respond, but David didn't stop. "6 months ago, you came to our apartment. You insulted our furniture, complained about the smell of medicine from my mom's hospital job, then told me I might be smart if I got a better education." David adjusted his glasses. "Funny thing is, 2 weeks later, you filed for custody. Robert's lawyer leaned in to whisper urgently. But David kept going. I did some research. My father recently lost a huge lawsuit. His third wife is divorcing him, and there's a trust fund from my late grandmother. Robert's face turned white. How did this boy know all of that? Even his lawyers didn't have all that info. David smiled calmly, confidently. Not like a child, but like someone holding all the winning cards. But before we talk about money and inheritance, he said, closing his notebook, let's first ask why is a man who barely knew me suddenly pretending to care? Robert Wellington was sweating now. His expensive lawyers looked totally confused. None of them had expected to face a child who clearly knew more about Robert's finances than they did. What had this 9-year-old boy found out during his time at the library? How did a child manage to collect information that even top-paid adults couldn't? Judge Harrison leaned forward, clearly interested. In his 30 years as a judge, he had never seen a child like this, so confident, so prepared. David, you said you had evidence, the judge asked. What kind of evidence could a 9-year-old have possibly found? David calmly adjusted his glasses. The gesture had become a quiet symbol of his confidence. Your Honor, he replied, for the last 3 months, since I found out about this lawsuit, I've spent every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at the Central Public Library. Researching what, exactly? Dr. Mitchell asked in a mocking tone. Public records, newspaper archives, corporate documents, previous lawsuits involving Mr. Wellington. David opened a new section of his notebook. The head librarian, Ms. Rodriguez, has a master's degree in information science. She showed me how to use basic legal databases. Janet stared at her son in awe. For months, David had told her he was working on a school project. She had no idea the project was to save their family. Robert finally lost his cool. This is ridiculous. A child digging into my private life like some kind of detective. Actually, it's all public information. Sir, David replied, calm and respectful. It's legal and available to any American citizen, no matter their age. Ms. Rodriguez, the librarian, had noticed something unusual from the start. When David first asked about how family courts worked, she realized he wasn't just curious, he was desperate. Later, she told Janet, that boy comes here like clockwork. He reads legal codes like other kids read comics. And he's learning too fast to be ordinary. David continued, keeping his tone steady and clear. In the last 18 months, Mr. Wellington has been involved in 3 major lawsuits. He lost a $2.3 million case with his former business partners at Wellington Industries. His third wife filed for divorce, accusing him of hiding money from her. Robert's face turned red. How dare you? And more importantly, David interrupted, flipping through his pages. I discovered something about a trust fund my late grandmother, Eleanor Wellington, created for me. It's worth $1.7 million, but I can only access it when I turn 18 or if my father gets full legal custody. The courtroom went completely silent. Dr. Mitchell leaned in, whispering something urgently to Robert, who didn't respond. This isn't a coincidence, David said. My grandmother died when I was 2. My father never told her about me, never introduced me to her, never allowed her to know she had a grandson. Janet remembered it clearly. Years ago, Robert had told her coldly, my family doesn't need to know about it. He didn't even call David by his name. But David had found something in the estate files. When Eleanor Wellington found out about her grandson through a private investigation, she immediately created the trust fund with one specific condition. The money would only be released early if my father proved he genuinely cared about me by getting custody. If not, the money goes to me when I turn 18, and he gets nothing. The math was simple. Robert had ignored David for 9 years. Now he was broke and trying to win custody not for love, but for the money. But my grandmother couldn't have known one thing, David added, closing his notebook. She didn't know her son would make a living by destroying small family businesses. Dr. Mitchell jumped up. Your Honor, this has gone too far. The child is making wild accusations. I can prove it, David said calmly. He pulled a neat manila folder from his school backpack and placed it on the table. Inside this folder are documents from 17 lawsuits in the past 5 years. In each case, Wellington Industries used insider information from local banks to buy properties from struggling families for far less than they were worth. Janet watched her son, amazed and speechless. He had turned a custody case into a quiet but powerful investigation from a public library and sheer determination. One of those families, David continued, pulling out photos, was the Santos family. They're Mexican immigrants who ran a small bakery. They worked 18 hours a day to survive. He held up one of the photos. Mr. Wellington found out, through a friend at the bank, that they were 3 months behind on their mortgage because their youngest son was hospitalized in an emergency. David looked directly at his father. Robert Wellington was sweating more now, clearly uncomfortable because his lies were being exposed by the one person he had underestimated the most. This has nothing to do with it. Has everything to do with it, David cut in sharply, because it shows a pattern. A man who takes advantage of struggling families for money, and now he's trying to do the same to his own family. Judge Harrison looked through the stack of documents David had presented. His face grew more serious with each page. David, where did you get this information? He asked. David answered calmly. Public court records, newspaper archives, state business records. Ms. Rodriguez, that the truth is usually out there. You just have to know where to look. Dr. Mitchell made one last effort to save his client. Your Honor, even if these claims were true, which we're not admitting, they don't change the fact that my client can give this child better educational opportunities. David gave a small, knowing smile. Not the smile of a kid, but the confident smile of someone who had just reached the final move in a chess game. Let's talk about education, David said, opening the final section of his notebook. I'd like to share Mr. Wellington's real plans for my future. Suddenly, Robert realized he had made a terrible mistake. His 9-year-old son wasn't just smart, he was strategic, and he had dug up secrets even Robert's lawyers didn't know. What was David about to reveal? How had he, using just a library and a kind librarian, built a stronger case than a team of millionaire attorneys? During one of the 4 visits I had with Mr. Wellington in my life, David said, his tone steady, I overheard a phone call. He called me a problem to be dealt with after getting custody. Dr. Mitchell jumped up. Your Honor, that's a private conversation. It can't. I can prove it, David interrupted. He pulled out a small digital recorder from his backpack. Ms. Rodriguez taught me that documenting evidence is a key part of any legal case, he explained. The courtroom went dead silent. Robert's hands trembled as David handed the recorder to Judge Harrison. This was recorded 6 months ago, Mr. Wellington thought. I was in my room doing homework. I left the recorder in the living room. The judge pressed play. The room filled with Robert Wellington's voice. Listen, as soon as I get custody, the boy's going to Riverside Military Academy. Strict boarding school. He'll stay there until 18, and I'll have full access to the inheritance for educational costs. The other person on the call wasn't clearly heard, but Robert continued. Exactly. $500 for tuition. The rest goes to me. He doesn't even need to know about the trust. It's perfect. She's out. I get the money, and I look like a responsible dad. Janet gasped and covered her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. She had no idea Robert planned to ship her son away and take the money. Dr. Mitchell looked ghost pale. His client had just ruined his entire case with his own words. There's more, David said quietly. This part is what he really thinks about me. The recording played again. The problem isn't just the money. The kid is too smart, always asking questions, observing everything. It's better to keep him out of the way until I get the money. We don't need him thinking he's more than he is. Robert jumped to his feet. This is a trap. He provoked me. A 9-year-old boy can't. Can't what? David asked, his voice cold. Can't be smart. Can't protect himself. Can't expose the truth about a father who sees him as a burden instead of a blessing. Judge Harrison turned off the recording. He looked directly at Robert. Mr. Wellington, he said sternly, this recording, combined with the financial evidence, paints a very disturbing picture of your intentions. Your Honor, David continued, I also looked into Riverside Military Academy. In the past 5 years, 3 students have taken their own lives. The school is under federal investigation for child abuse. Dr. Mitchell tried one last, desperate argument. But, Your Honor, my client still has the financial ability to give David a better life. To do what? David interrupted. Send me to a place where kids die. Use my money while pretending to care. Take me away from the only person who's ever loved me. That was the breaking point. Robert snapped. You're just an arrogant little kid who doesn't know his place. He shouted. I know exactly who I am, David said calmly. And I know who you are. You're not my father. You're just a man I share DNA with. A real father doesn't try to throw his child away for money. The judge slammed his gavel. Mr. Wellington, sit down or you'll be removed from this courtroom. David turned to the last page of his notebook. There's one final thing I want to share. Your Honor, it's about why my grandmother set up the trust fund. Robert looked even more pale than before. David took a deep breath. I found a letter from her in the estate files. A letter addressed to me, meant to be opened when I turned 16. But because of the custody case, I was allowed to access it early, he continued. My grandmother wrote that she always knew Robert wasn't fit to be a father, that she set up the fund to protect me from him, and if he ever tried to take custody, just for money, should use the trust to fight back. David paused, then looked directly at Robert. She even hired private investigators years ago. They documented everything. All your shady business deals. All your lies. It's all on file with the trust administrator. Robert Wellington slumped back into his chair. For the first time, he realized the painful truth. He had been completely outsmarted by a 9-year-old boy, a boy he never took seriously, a boy he saw only as an obstacle. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Based on the evidence presented, including financial documents, audio recordings, and the plaintiff's history, deny the custody request completely, and I'm ordering a full investigation into possible fraud involving the child's trust fund. Dr. Mitchell leaned over to whisper something urgent to Robert, but it didn't matter anymore. The case was lost. David quietly packed up his papers and recorder, calm as ever. Your Honor, may I say one last thing? You may, David. I want Mr. Wellington to know that I didn't do this because I was angry or wanted revenge. I did it because every child deserves to be loved, not used for money. As security escorted Robert Wellington out of the courtroom, under arrest for attempted fraud, David smiled. Not a smug smile. A quiet, proud smile. That day, in a courtroom full of adults, a 9-year-old boy had done the impossible. He proved that intelligence, courage, and love could beat power, money, and lies. But what David accomplished wasn't just about winning a case. It was the beginning of a new life for his family. 3 years passed, and David Thompson's life changed in ways even he never expected. The secret recording that exposed Robert Wellington went viral. Over 50 million views. News stations picked up the story. People across the country were inspired. David became a national symbol of courageous child who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. Laws were changed in 17 states because of him. Today, we welcome David Thompson, said the host of America's most popular morning show. At just 12 years old, David shocked the country when he defended his mother in court using nothing but his voice and a public library. The crowd clapped. David, now taller and wearing new glasses, simply smiled. "I'd rather just be called David," he said. "A kid who learned that every child has a voice, even when grown-ups don't want to hear it." The audience cheered. Backstage, Janet watched her son with tears in her eyes. She was now a supervisor at the hospital where she worked. Promoted after her story inspired a nationwide campaign to support single, working mothers. The hospital even launched a scholarship in her name, the Janet Thompson Program, to help kids of workers chase their dreams. "She's here with us today," the host said. "Janet, how does it feel to see your son become an inspiration to millions?" Janet stepped onto the stage, humble as always, but glowing with pride. "David's always been bright," she said. "But what makes me proudest is his heart. He never used this story to show off. He used it to help others." And it was true. Over the past 3 years, David visited schools in poor areas, teaching children about their legal rights. His book, Every Child Has a Voice, became a bestseller. All the money from it went into a fund to help families in custody, battles who couldn't afford lawyers. "David," the host asked, "tell us about your library project." "Well," David replied, adjusting his glasses, "a library saved me. So we started a program, Cool Law. Libraries in over 1,200 public libraries. They have books about kids' rights, written in simple language, and computers with free access to legal help." The camera panned to Janet. She wiped away a tear. Her little boy had turned pain into purpose. Meanwhile, across town, Robert Wellington sat alone in a tiny apartment in the suburbs of Chicago. His hair had gone grey. He wore cheap clothes and worked at an electronics store, only job he could get. The court investigation had revealed all his crimes. The attempted fraud, the financial lies, the schemes. He lost everything. His company, his mansion, his wife. He even served 18 months in prison. He stared at the TV. David was on again. "Stupid kid," Robert muttered and switched it off. But what stung most wasn't the story being replayed. It was that David never spoke badly of him in public. When asked about his father, David always answered with grace. "I hope he finds peace." Love can't be forced or bought, and holding a grudge never helped anyone. But protecting yourself and those you love, that's something you must do. Back in the studio, the host asked one final question. "David, what advice would you give to kids going through tough times with their families?" David looked straight into the camera. "First, you're not alone. Second, you're stronger than you think. And third, the truth always finds a way even when it feels like it never will." He paused, and then his voice grew stronger. "Don't let anyone tell you you're too small to make a difference. I was 9 years old when I changed my life and my mom's life forever. You can change yours too." 6 months later, David received a letter from a girl named Sofia Martinez in Los Angeles. She wrote, "I used your Cool LA Library project to help my grandma stop an unfair eviction. Thank you for teaching me that every child has a voice." Janet found David reading the letter in his room, surrounded by hundreds of others from kids just like Sophia. "How does it feel?" she asked him. David carefully folded the letter and placed it in his special box. "Remember when you told me that sometimes the scariest things are the most important?" Janet nodded. "I get it now," David said. "If Robert hadn't tried to take me away, I might never have learned that even a child can change the world. If adults stop underestimating us." That same day, David got another life-changing call. Harvard University was offering him a full scholarship to their new law and social justice program for students who had shown leadership before turning 16. Janet asked, "Are you going to accept it?" David smiled. "I will, but only on one condition. I want to use my education to build a legal system that protects all kids." Not just the lucky or the loud, but even the quiet ones, who don't know how to speak up yet. Years later, David Thompson became the youngest lawyer ever admitted to the bar at just 16, his very first case, a lawsuit against the US education system for failing to teach kids their legal rights. He won, and from that day on, every school in America was required to teach basic legal rights to all students. As for Robert Wellington, he never recovered, working low-paying jobs, living a quiet life in shame. He sometimes thought of the brilliant son he had lost to greed, and in his most honest moments, he knew the truth. David had become the kind of man he could never be. David's story proved that real strength doesn't come from money or fame. It comes from truth, love, and the courage to fight for what's right. And the boy took down a corrupt system, using nothing but a library card, a recorder, and a heart full of love for his mom. David taught us that when you fight for what's right, the universe stands behind you. Robert learned that underestimating a child may be the most expensive mistake a man can make, and children everywhere learned one powerful truth: their voice matters. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories that prove sometimes the smallest heroes make the biggest difference.